In this video, we're going to be covering the behavior of jumping up. It is one of the most common complaints of many dog owners, and understandably so. It can be painful, they can scratch us, knock things out of our hands. It tends to be really frustrating for children, and for older adults it can be downright dangerous. It's understandable why most people don't want their dogs performing this behavior. Before we jump right into things, I do want to note that your dog jumping on you doesn't necessarily mean that they're being naughty or bad. It's not abnormal. In fact, jumping up is a pretty normal greeting behavior for dogs. It may be normal, but that doesn't mean that we can't train an alternate greeting behavior. I want to begin my training session with something really simple she knows to help build engagement and focus. I'm just using my yes marker cue, meaning come into my hand with some movement back and forth. And I'm also holding my hand with the treat down low at about head level. Always, always, always remember, feed the dog where you want the dog. In this case, if the dog's not jumping on me, her head should be where it naturally is, at her head level. So that's where I'm providing the reinforcement. If I'm essentially cueing her to take food from my hand and my hand is down low, jumping up isn't even going to cross her mind. Coming up here, I'm going to talk to her in an excited voice, and as she runs over, I'm going to scatter feed. For many dogs, that high-pitched voice can cause what's called overarousal. Overarousal is what happens when an individual is exposed to a high level of sensory stimulation. Their brain is flooded with excitatory chemicals such as adrenaline and cortisol. These neurochemicals are what are mostly responsible for our dogs acting crazy or overexcited. Research also tells us that overaroused brains are poorly responsive to learning and memory. Keep this in mind if your dog isn't listening or is being stubborn. They may be in an overaroused state. Back to our border collie friend here, you may notice that I'm creating a pattern of tossing a treat away from me, calling her back, and then marking with scatter as I scatter feed on the floor in front of me. Now I want us to think back to that overaroused brain for a moment. When we use the marker cue scatter, part of the way it is so effective at calming our dogs down comes right down to some very interesting neurology behind it all. Firstly, think of the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system as opposites. During overarousal, the limbic system engages. It's responsible for more basic emotional reactions and associations. Think excitement, rage, anxiety, etc. When we scatter feed, this engages the dog's seeking system, as they must forage and hunt for the food. This is linked to the prefrontal cortex, which handles more complex functions like learning, analysis, and impulse control. This means that the limbic system becomes less active and therefore lowers our dog's arousal level. Also notice that I'm not using any type of pain or intimidation to achieve my goals here. There is, of course, an ethics component to this decision, but it's also due to the fact that if the dog is over-aroused, the limbic system is, as we know, engaged. The limbic system is responsible for a lot of Pavlovian associations. This means that if I use these techniques, it would increase my chances of creating behavioral fallout, such as, say, fearful behavior or fear aggression. Okay. Hopefully you're still with me, and hopefully you understand a little bit more about why I choose to use a scatter feed when I'm dealing with overarousal and jumping in dogs. Back to our border collie friend here. Notice I'm continuing the pattern of tossing a treat and then feeding down low or scattering when she comes back. So as I create this pattern, I start to notice that she's getting in the hang of stopping and I don't see any signs of jumping, so I begin to delay my reinforcement as she comes back. She ends up coming in really hot here, but look at how nicely she slows down and plants all 4 feet on the ground. She's learning the pattern, and therefore I'm creating a good habit of the greeting behavior that I would like to see in her. These next 2 repetitions she gives me are absolutely beautiful and exactly what I'm looking for. Our next steps forward in continuing to generalize this behavior would be patterning it in new environments with new people and new scenarios so that it's seen as the way to do things no matter what you're doing. One of my favorite sayings as a trainer is train for the situation, not in the situation. What this might mean in the context of teaching your dog not to jump on you is that if you know your dog is extremely over-aroused and overexcited when you get home and jumps all over you, it might not be a good idea for your first training session with your dog to be when you've come home after being gone for 8 hours. You'd be much better off training for the situation in which you mimic that scenario. Perhaps you step out of the house for 10 seconds, come in, scatter, toss, and create that pattern, and then step out again and repeat until the dog starts to learn to come up and sit or just not jump when you enter the doorway. This way, when the stakes are high, you've been gone for 8 hours, you come home, it's a little easier for the dog because they've already learned it in a low stress, low arousal environment. You also have control over all the variables when you train for the situation. So you can add or subtract things that are difficult for your dog as they're showing you they're ready for them, versus training in the situation might mean you can't do that. Hopefully you found this video helpful in your training journey. Remember, it is a journey, not a race. Go at your pace and your dog's pace, and most importantly, have fun with your dog.